Okay, Dad, today is Friday, May 10th, and maybe we can start with a different kind of question, something I was just thinking about last night. I was just wondering, what type of government do we have? Are we in democracy? I hear a lot of talk about how we need to save democracy. Is it fair to say that we are a democracy or a representative democracy, or what is the state of our government? Doesn't
Okay.
feel right.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, Good question. And I'll get to it right away. But before I address that question, I'm just going to, tie up a loose end from
Okay,
last
go
time.
for it.
Because remember yesterday I mentioned, not yesterday, but 2 days ago, I mentioned the fact that some of the high level government officials in the post Maidan Ukrainian government were actually U.S. citizens. And you said, well, were they dual, Ukrainian, U.S.? And I said, well, I'd check into it. I did get one definite answer, and that's the finance minister. Served as the finance minister, a woman who served from 2014 to 2016, U.S. born and bred. And more than that, she was actually in the State Department. She was um, so not only did we have an American citizen, not a dual citizen, somebody who grew up, as an American, um, but a member of our government.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
the head of a very important ministry right at the
right. I was about to
start.
say that's an interesting appointment too, the finance ministry. Do you think she was appointed there to kind of essentially help funnel money from the U.S. government into whatever the United States was trying to
Well,
do? Well,
certainly possible. I mean, that's just again, she would be. Um, there's hardly a position that's more important. The oversight of money. That's what
right.
it is, and so yeah, it would be. Um,
We should get her on the podcast.
Somehow, I don't think she would be willing. But
So
anyway, so I thought that was, it was important to clear that up. It wasn't, some if it was a dual, maybe someone who was born in Ukraine later got U.S. citizenship and then went back to Ukraine. Okay, that is a connection, and it's worth pointing out. But this is much more blatant.
but
And
yeah,
yeah,
that's a big role. I mean,
yeah,
that's the person holding the purse bag,
right,
right? That's where she gets to disperse the inflow of money coming from the United States or
right,
wherever to fund whatever operations it is.
yeah.
Were there any other positions that were filled by
Well,
Americans?
I've heard that there were. I weren't able to track down the others. I
Yeah.
think that was the most important. I'm sure that there were other ones.
And
Other
why
U.S.
did she leave in 2016?
I don't know.
And maybe because the optics maybe look too bad. They're like, this
It
is too
could be.
obvious.
Yeah, there may have been some, started to get some flack over it, maybe, but I don't know. I really don't know. But she
Okay.
was there from 2014 to 2016.
Okay. Well, I think it's safe to say that Ukraine hasn't been a proper democracy since 2014.
Yeah.
If we have an American born and
Oh,
bred
right.
citizen.
That's just part of the problems for Ukraine, but we're talking about the U.S. now, so
Right.
we'll get into that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, the U.S., properly speaking, was never a democracy. Never was intended to be a democracy, but a republic. Pure democracy is only possible, on a very small scale. Like in a city state in ancient Greece, for example.
Mhm.
Where you can have all the citizens can come together, in some, you know, an arena or within the city and discuss and vote on something. Well, we have a republic. We elect certain people to represent us. In Congress. Um, but are we really a democracy? I mean, I guess what that really means is the policies that our government pursues, do they reflect the will of the people? Right. I think that's what we mean when we say we have a democracy or we might lose our democracy or whatever. I think that's in the back of everybody's mind. And I would say that increasingly no. Um, Actually, there have been studies done that have just found that again, that money is much more important to American politics
Mm.
than actual votes. And I've heard too from people who have worked with politicians. They said they're surprised by the extent with which they will ignore actually polling and say the people really want this, and instead they listen to you know their their consultants or their
The large donors.
yeah, and that's about the money. This campaign is going to fail if we run out of money, and that's what they're fixated on.
Do you think that's what Biden's just concerned about? He's not looking at his the constituents. Obviously, he's
Right.
pursuing unpopular policies, but
Right.
he thinks money trumps it, so he's going to
Yeah, I think
pursue it.
that is a big part of it. I mean, I think he's also it dovetails with his own ideological commitments. I mean, he's a fervent Zionist and always has been.
Mm.
Yeah, but yeah, that's he knows on which side his bread is buttered, and so yeah, I think there's no question about it. I mean, again, like we said, he's a political animal too. All these people are, and then whatever they do have their their beliefs, their fervently held beliefs, but they also want to be reelected and remain in power. And I think that's something that he's always looking at. He says, if I really cross Israel, maybe he has never had any intention. He's thought maybe he's such a true believer. He hasn't. But if he did, he'd probably squelch that thought right away because, all the big donors are just going to cut me out,
Mm.
and
So
yeah, and also, the big powerful media guns will be pointed at me. And that's
right.
what happens when you cross Israel.
So we so what you're saying is basically we're supposed to have a representative democracy. We should vote for people in our state to represent us and obey the wishes of the constituents, but that's not happening.
Right.
And the main reason is because of big money coming in and influencing it. The big
Yeah.
money can buy the politicians and
Right.
override
Right. I
what.
think, yeah, money is a big part of it. But then also you have, small groups of just kind of, of ideologically committed people like the neoconservatives. And, sure, they can benefit financially, but again, they believe in something, they believe in American exceptionalism, and, and they are also Zionists at the same time. And, I don't think that's just, um, they're not, they're not in it for the money so much as for the power, a certain kind of power, and a vision of how American power should be wielded. So small groups, with that are just this has always been a problem. I think political scientists have always understood it. It's just that small organized groups, with financial muscle, can really override the majority quite easily in a democracy like ours, or so-called democracy like ours.
Is there any way to safeguard against that? How what are there if it can always be co-opted where you just have a very well function, well active group that's able to organize and
Yeah,
have some weight behind it, then some financial weight behind it, then they can just override the majority. Then that seems like a big problem,
yeah,
right?
it is a huge problem. I
So,
guess when there is campaign finance reform, there used to be efforts to really restrict the amount of donations, from large donors to political candidates and political groups, and that it was I can't remember the name of the Supreme Court decision, but that was ended. Those efforts at campaign finance reform were basically ended several years ago. But I think that's just part of it. I think you also, in the end, you have to have, every society has an elite. That's the thing. That's what you have to. That's a reality that everybody has to recognize, and you want to have an elite that actually has a commitment to the best interest of the society. They're always going to occasionally line their own pockets or whatever, um, but if you have an elite that is truly patriotic, I think that's the best safeguard. And we just don't have that kind of elite. We have elites that are actually put Israel first. That's just not an exaggeration.
mm,
It was pointed out like recently. I just saw Thomas Massey is one of the true libertarian candidates, or not candidates, but rather representatives in the House, and who opposed, along with another 100 Republicans, opposed that foreign aid bill. After he opposed that, APAC immediately gave $300,000 to his opponent. He's just been targeted because he's
mm,
somebody that he opposed aid for Israel. It's blatant. This is aid for a foreign country, and now we're going to try to get rid of him.
mm.
It's the thing is, it's so out in the open that we're all kind of gotten used to it. But you think this is an extraordinary state of affairs. Like if there was all this hysteria about Russian and meddling and whatever, but it never amounted to anything. Nobody could find it. But it is right there ahead of us. I mean, they're being open about it. After, targeting these people, they've said, they bragged, they said that we've, out of the 100 or so that we have supported, all of them, all of their candidates succeeded. The ones that we targeted, so many failed, and that's long been true. I mean, that's APAC is actually.
It's still so crazy how powerful the Israeli lobby is, how powerful APAC is, that it can have in a foreign country across the world,
right,
that can just control the most powerful government in the world. The United States is. That's really insane. It's hard for me to fully wrap my head around.
That's right. Well, it is. And I think, a number of us knew about this, again, there was the very important article and then book, The Israel Lobby by Walter Mearsheimer. It came out, about 20 years ago. But people who have been following Palestine and affairs there have known this to be true for decades. But until recently, I think it was just like, it was easy to write us off as conspiracy theorists or, wackos or anti-Semites or whatever. But it's just been so blatant in the last several months that I think there's a lot of people who've had their eyes open to that fact.
Right. Well, when did this start to happen? I mean, before the creation of the State of Israel, would it be fair to say that we had a representative democracy? Is it really?
Yeah. Well, of course, it's not just Israel or not just foreign policy.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. Right. It's like, I mean, you have Israel, with foreign policy, but also you have big pharma influencing buying politicians as well. There's a lot of these sort of huge special interest groups that are lobbying the government.
Right.
When did that really become a problem? And so once we have this situation, where we're not really the representative democracy thing is just kind of a sham, right? Because we will say platitudes to constituents, say the right things, but at the end of the day, the decision makers are the big pharma and APAC that are giving all the money to the politicians for their campaigns, right? So when did that start to happen? Like when can we say that we started transitioning from this truly a representative democracy into kind of this, what would you say, this corrupt marriage of law, corporate powers and lobbies and the U.S. government? I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, right. Well, I think that describes it pretty well. It's hard to believe that there hasn't always been some of that. I mean, that money always, buys influence, and it always will. It's just the degree to which it does now. That's the problem. We also have, a greater concentration of industries. Again, it's just, financial power is more greatly concentrated than it was. And then overall too, the gap between the wealthy, the ultra wealthy, and and the rest of us has grown over the last few decades. So there's been just those economic trends certainly have tilted the playing field in favor of the lobbies, the various, special interest groups. If you want to choose, again, I pointed to that Supreme Court decision that put an end to, all efforts to restrict, donations to by large financial donors to candidates. That's one point. But
when was that?
Approximately 10 years ago. Again, this is something this is another loose end for me to tie. Mm-hmm. I think it's approximately 10 years ago. But yeah, I mean, it was recognized as a problem then. That's why partly those efforts were made to reform the system. I don't know if I can point to a certain time. I think it's just been a steady progression over the last few decades.
Yeah, well, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the case of, Israel is an exceptional case. And I think I pointed to, again, the USS Liberty incident. It's a watershed moment, where we went from, also there's a very interesting quote that I came across again. I've seen it before. It was actually a tape of a conversation between President Nixon and the evangelist Billy Graham. And I think it was in 1972, give or take a year. And it's actually Billy Graham said that, um, if the control, the grip that Jewish Zionists have over the country, over its policies. If that grip is not released, this country is going to go to the dogs, he said. Mm-hmm. And Nixon, again, a very smart guy, plenty of reasons to dislike him or even hate him, but a very smart guy, very astute, very perceptive, said, "Oh God, that's true. I believe that absolutely, but I can't say it." See, it was taped. This tape wasn't revealed until decades later. But this is, again, this is one aspect. It's just the influence of the Israel lobby, we can say. Mm. Back then, I think it was probably fairer to say we're talking about Jewish Zionists, because Christian Zionism was only just beginning, and it was almost entirely a Jewish phenomenon. But now it's obviously grown beyond that, as we can see in the Republican Party.
Right.
Right. So, again, I would go to, the USS Liberty incident in 1967, right? The 6-Day War. Mm. It's just before then. That was a moment when, you began to see that something had gone seriously wrong. Before then, it was, certainly Eisenhower could be openly critical, and other politicians of, efforts of Israel or Jewish Zionists to influence policy. And but then by 1970, a few days after, not a few days, but a few years after the 6-Day War, the president of the United States felt like he couldn't even speak openly about it.
And you think that's because of the 1967, the USS Liberty was the
watershed moment? It's not so much a cause and effect thing, but that was just sort of a moment where he saw he passed a threshold.
Okay, would you say it's kind of a signal that showed that Israel can do what it wants?
Yeah, well, that's why at that point I think Israel started to think, hey, we can kill their people and they'll cover up for us. I mean, this is extraordinary.
So if anybody that doesn't know,
right.
So just if anybody listening doesn't know about the USS Liberty, it was a U.S. Naval ship that was attacked and 37 or something?
37 were killed. I think it was 170 injured.
Right. So 37 US.
And if it wasn't for just heroic actions by certain people on board, it would have been sunk. And it went on for hours. They were continually, the Israeli aircraft were continually strafing the ship, and they were waving the American flag. There's just no question they knew what they were doing.
So they were trying to sink it for a false flag.
Yeah, it's not known exactly why, but that's the best, the most sensible theory. And they were probably going to blame it on Egypt.
Instead of the U.S. government going to Israel and saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" They shut up and told all the survivors of the USS Liberty to also shut up.
Right.
And so, really crazy story. So if anybody hasn't heard it, you should definitely look into it.
Yeah, and some of the survivors, there are quite a few of them are around to this day, and they're very angry. And now they're talking,
right?
But they're not. They never get attention in the mainstream media.
Mm. Yeah, the whole influence of Israel on our U.S. political system makes it unique. I feel like from other previous, maybe historical.
It's hard to. I don't know if you could ever find anything quite like it. It is an extraordinary, relationship, if you want to call it. It's just
it throws everything. It puts a wrench into everything. Because you were talking about how every society, every government has an elite, and just whether or not the elite is in control. But here we have our elite, but then there's also this elite in another country that is purchasing our elite. So
we have an elite that I mean, it's just like it's not that that the elite is all Jewish or anything by any means, but it is firmly Zionist. I mean, that's just part of being in the elite in this country. Is that you put Israel ahead of the United States, and so that's what I'm saying. You have to have every country is going to have an elite, but what you hope for is a patriotic elite that puts the interests of its own country, and I think that's what you have. And now, one time it wasn't true in Russia either. That's in the 1990s. That was a time when, their elite was, either, the oligarchs put their own interests ahead of the country, or they, or they put the interests of the United States ahead of the country. Mm. But now, I think you have an elite in Russia that is patriotic, that is now firmly committed to the best interests of Russia. And I think the same thing can be said of China. Of course, you're going to
Mhm.
find corrupt individuals, but in general, they are patriots. And just because you think about it, that's just normal and healthy.
Right.
It's not necessarily the virtuous
You
people or
root for your
whatever.
home team.
Right,
You
exactly.
own your
Right.
team. You want your team to do well.
Right, exactly. Right.
It's
Yeah, so it's nothing really extraordinary that you would have that. It's what we have is extraordinary, and it's a real problem.
well, it almost seems like this is always a constant cycle, though. That at one point in time, the U.S. we had a patriotic elite, proper aristocracy, but then over time they become corrupt and they distance themselves from the regular everyday citizens and are disconnected from their issues and just sort of care about preserving power.
Yeah.
It's just a constant cycle. So it seems like ours has a unique element with the Israeli lobby,
Right.
but it was when you were talking about the elite and whether or not they're patriotic and a good elite. It made me think about something you taught me a long time ago. When I was in high school, I think you taught me about anacyclosis, sort of the cyclical pattern of governments. I don't even know if you remember, but the idea was it's from a Greek historian.
I think you may be talking about
Polybus, I think is the historian.
Well, I think this is from Plato, and that is that there's a cycle. You have democracy, but democracy degenerates into oligarchy, and then no, it's actually let's go the other way.
All right, let me try.
Right. I'm going the wrong direction.
You start with essentially a king. A single ruler, and eventually that king becomes a tyrant. Over time, and it evolves into a tyranny. And the tyranny eventually evolves into an aristocracy, which is a ruling elite that is a patriotic elite, like you were talking about. That eventually descends into an oligarchy, similar to a tyranny, where they become corrupted. And then, from my understanding, oligarchy will eventually turn into a democracy, and democracy will eventually turn into an ochlocracy, which is mob rule, essentially. Okay, right. And that because you can never fully appease the demands of the masses. So it eventually just goes into this and it falls down and kind of repeats the cycle. It's an oversimplification.
Yeah, right. But I think the important part of it is actually that democracy tends to descend into mob rule, and mob rule then leads to a new tyrant, to impose order on the chaos, and eventually even the mob demands a strong man to
so it's an oversimplification, right. But kind of what I'm seeing, the way I look at it, is that the U.S. is now descending into the mob rule type of where the democracy is starting to break apart. We overpromise everything to our citizens. That's a big problem with democracy, is that you get elected by constantly promising to deliver more
than you can possibly deliver. Right?
Yeah, and the biggest issue is that with a country that has the printing press and the world reserve currency, they can just constantly promise and do everything on debt until we have something that we have never seen before in history, right? Such a huge debt bubble that's built on nothing, that there's no sound money backing it. It's just the faith of the U.S. government, and the faith of the U.S. government is eroding quickly now, which will help us get to that mob rule, I think, as it does. So, I don't know if I have a question here exactly, but you kind of
I don't really have anything to add. Yeah, I think that we probably discussed that sufficiently to this point. Yeah.
Right. So we have let's sum it up real quick. What is our government? What do we have? Incentive.
Well, I think it is clearly some kind of oligarchy. It's just, again, there have been, this is not just an opinion, there have been some rigorous, studies done by political scientists, looking at policies that are popular, supported by a majority of the population, and then finding again and again, it's not the popular things that get implemented, it's just where the money is.
I feel like there needs to be a specific term for the U.S. case, where you have an oligarchy, but then you have this parasitic Israeli influence on top of it.
It is
that makes it even worse and scarier.
That's what makes it unique. It's a very strange state of affairs,
right?
Because it's just like, for a long time, it's just everyone has been people still are terrified of talking about it, obviously, and then the Republicans are going nuts and claiming that everybody is on the Democratic Party is a closet Nazi or something, and all the demonstrators are are agents of Hamas, and it just it's just not it's just beyond absurd. But it's the thing is it's so over the top that I think again it was just sort of thing. It was something that people couldn't talk about before, but now they have to talk about it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think putting stupid people, I think it's actually a sign of the end of, let's say, the Zionist occupation of our government, that we have these idiotic uh, Republicans, seizing on it and just making fools of themselves.
Mm.
I mean, for the time being, they probably think they're doing well, or anyway, they're getting the airtime and on Fox News and the other networks too, because they do have the establishment behind them. But it's just that anybody with half a brain is going to
Do
look
you
at that
think
and
people
think,
within Israel understand that, or they just want to, we gotta, this is their only card to play, so they just got to keep on getting these
I'm sure
politicians
some do.
on?
I'm sure some do. It's something that people have commented on. It's just that, uh, and something that we talked about earlier is just this general shift from the left to the right in this country. The shift in Zionist support.
Mm.
And to be honest, it's just like what we call, I don't even know if it really deserves to be called the right, but just say the Republican side of the spectrum, Republican leading. This is okay. They do have obviously a certain amount of votes and whatever, but this is the culturally, the less powerful part of the spectrum. It's just like, our cultural elites are overwhelmingly Democrats.
Mm.
I mean, that's just, and that it used to be also, it used to be that maybe the cultural elites were, but the financial elites were Republican. Now it's actually the financial and the cultural elites tend to be overwhelmingly Democrats. The people that run the largest, gosh, financial firms and so on and so forth in this country. The donations are going, to the Democratic candidate by a ratio, over the Republican, in this case, Donald Trump, by a ratio of at least 2-1. That's been true for the last several election cycles.
Well, why is that?
Yeah.
It's just that the money is just
Well, it's just
in
been
the hands of the left. I mean,
well, it's been a cultural shift. I mean, it used to be that corporations were thought to be sort of we're allied with the Republicans. I mean, this goes back to the 60s and earlier, when the Democrats were the party of labor, the Republicans, were the party of big business. And there's some people who still think that's true, and including a lot of Republicans, but increasingly it's not true.
Mm.
It's just that you find in executive boardrooms or whatever, certainly on social issues, and they're just completely, on the side of the left. So that's why we've had these really awkward incidents, like the
Dylan Mulvaney,
Bud Light and
right.
That kind of thing. It's just they're out of touch with their the consumers. The guys out there who drink Bud Light are generally Republican leading, but in the boardrooms they're Democrat leading, and they're socially on the left.
Yeah.
This is something it's happened. I think maybe it's a result of our education system. It's just like the leftists took over the education system. And so eventually the products of elite institutions. I know for years and years, like conservatives would just make fun of what was going on campuses and just like, oh, but they didn't stop to think that, hey, those are like the factories for the future elite.
Mm.
And now those people are in charge. And so it's no longer a joke. They run the show. So anyway, what I'm saying is just that if you have, there's this, still obviously in the establishment is still very, very strongly Zionist, but looking again at the younger people at these elite institutions, they're Democrat leaning, like students at Ivy League colleges are overwhelmingly from families that vote Democrat.
Mm.
And these students are overwhelmingly will identify as Democrats,
So,
but now they're going against Zionism. And so, and now you find Zionism finding its most intense, kind of blatant form is now, increasingly, it's stretched to say it's all over there. Obviously, it's very powerful in both parties. But increasingly it's, with You find it among blue state Republicans. But
Mm-hmm.
that is a sign, actually, of the weakening, I think, position of Zionism in this country, because these are the culturally weaker people. I mean, it's just this is not the elite.
Do you think
This is
that Israel will start to just go all in on the conservative side, on the
well.
Republican
I
Party,
think that's
and
been true of Netanyahu in general. I mean, that he's actually been rather open about how he doesn't like the Democrats and he likes Donald Trump.
mm,
So, yeah, and I think you see some of the same tendencies within Israel. Just like I think I was saying earlier, like the old Zionists, it's not so much that they were true humanitarians or whatever. They were just slicing away at Palestinian territory, and obviously engaged in this dispossession of the Palestinian people. But they were sophisticated. They knew about how to, talk about it, how to wring their hands and say it's complicated and all that. But it seems like, increasingly, as we see now, but it was before October 7th, you were seeing this already. They just said Israeli government officials and, various people who represented Israel to the outside world. These people were just becoming increasingly blatant and crude, and just were not making an effort to hide what they were about. And maybe that plays well with a certain part of the crowd, but I don't think it plays very well with, certainly with the young elites.
mm. Here's just changing direction just a little bit. What presidential candidate right now do you think is more dangerous for the world? Is it Biden or Trump? They both seem pretty dangerous.
Yeah, I, you know, I think that it's just about equally dangerous. I mean, Biden is more predictable. And I think we mentioned earlier that Putin said he'd rather have Biden, and mainly just because he understands Biden and knows what he's going to do.
Mm,
No, he's terrible as far as he's concerned, but okay, you know who he is. And then it's hard to know. Trump is rather erratic. I mean, sometimes he can, you think he's heading one way, and then he'll flip flop, just like he did on the foreign aid bill. You don't really know what he stands for, what he believes. As a lot of people said, maybe what he stands for and what he believes is the guy he talked to, what he heard from the guy he talked to half an hour ago.
okay, so no, they're equally bad. All right, that's
Yeah,
great.
but
So,
I think clearly, sometimes actually, see the thing about Trump is he doesn't guard his mouth, or he does sometimes say, hey, maybe this is stupid. Why do we even have NATO? Why can't we get along with the Russians? Or look, Netanyahu really screwed things up, or Israel is becoming really unpopular. He said all these things, because I think it's just something that he thinks. It's just like he doesn't hide his thoughts. And it comes out, and then people, who are maybe, again, dissidents in one way or another get excited about it. But he just doesn't follow through. In the end, he does what his advisors tell him to do. And he doesn't have the again, the strength of character or the intellectual discipline to just, put together a team of people who are support a certain set of principles, because he doesn't really have a firm set of principles. So he ends up he doesn't clear the swamp of the swamp creatures, but he just ends up sinking in the swamp.
yeah. This is also one of the reasons why I just think it's hard to say that the United States is a democracy if these are our two choices. It's so unbelievable that these are our two choices.
Right.
A guy that is clearly senile, probably has severe cognitive difficulties now. He just has trouble reading from teleprompter. That's our current president, and he wants to go another 4 years, and his presidency has been a disaster.
Right.
And then the alternative is just Trump, who is just pure chaos. You just don't know, what is he going to do? Maybe he might get lucky, and and it lands heads this time, but next time, who knows? He could just say, we're going to war with Iran. I don't know.
But right.
There's a couple of different things that I feel like we could talk about. I'm just thinking where we should start. One is I just saw that the senator from Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn, they've been trying to push a bill to label protesters as terrorists and put them on no-fly.
Right. I saw that. I think
on
she
no-fly
and
list.
two other Republicans were put forward that bill. Yeah.
Right. Is there anything you want to elaborate on that, or just?
I think it speaks for itself. It's just just crazy, just absolutely insane.
Do you think it'll actually happen that we can say that they're trying to use some terrorist law and say that to label these kids as terrorists is it's pretty crazy,
Yeah, right. I don't think
But
so,
this
but
just
it's just
speaks to kind of just sort of larger fear that I think a lot of Americans are starting to feel is that we had this huge security state and it's being turned on its own people. We
right,
saw it in the Twitter files, the censorship of
right,
your speech. The Patriot Act was a huge blow, obviously, right
right.
after 9/11.
Yeah,
And now we're seeing kids go, being trying to label people as terrorists or
right.
anti-Semites. And we're seeing the use of lawfare politically, in this current election. So I think it just has a lot of people kind of scared about
Right.
what we don't we always
Yeah, we
talk
are.
about freedom, but
Right.
it's eroding so quickly.
Yeah.
But it
Right. A lot of
also people are getting acclimated to it. I think people
yeah,
kind of
unfortunately.
forget
Right. But
what
a
it's
lot of
supposed to
people,
be.
John, actually pointed out the contrast between how um, the student protests in the 1960s were dealt with to what we're seeing now, and that is certainly there were crackdowns, there was actual violence, like killings at Kent State. Um, but you didn't see this kind of organized united front at the federal level to simply impose a nationwide crackdown, basically, with these very draconian laws and these very expansive definitions of anti-Semitism. There really was nothing like there was still a more robust and democracy. I mean, they're just um, more power, or given to local authorities, whether the university administrations or states and
Mm,
local governments. What's one of the problems? I think some people rang the alarm bells a long time ago. Is when universities started taking federal money. Say, well, you're giving up your independence from that.
it
If you
all
do
comes
that,
down
then
to money. It
yeah,
really does. I just feel like the biggest problem with the United States is that we have this broken money and we can just
yeah,
keep
and
on
it's
funding
increasingly
anything.
it's centralized too. It's just
Yeah.
like if it was local money, say, okay, well, in this state they're pushing this law, in that state they're pushing another, but it's all federal money, and so it's just like these administrators are brought to Congress and they're read the Riot Act and told what they have to do, and they just do it because
Mm.
that's basically administrators. They've come to see their job as making sure that the money keeps on
Right.
flowing.
That's
Right.
get everybody paid. That's all
Yeah.
all they
Yeah.
care about.
Right.
What has the temperature been right now on these protests? Have they been increasing, or has it kind of just? I haven't been
Yeah.
seeing
Right. I
as
know there
much
are
recently.
continuing protests. Nothing. It's not receiving the attention that like the protests at Columbia and at UCLA received. So it may be that they're receding some. Students are graduating. Commencement addresses have already, ceremonies have been held. So some of these, semesters are coming to an end, and with them the protests. And then, a lot of these students were subjected to very severe penalties.
Mm,
I mean, some were expelled and whatever. It's rather, people that were very close to completing getting their degrees were kicked out of the university. I saw one that was particularly shocking, not in the U.S. but in the U.K. There was a Palestinian woman who took part in a protest, and when she was identified, the UK government denied her student visa. And the thing is that she has 15 family members that have been killed in Gaza.
oh,
So why wouldn't she be protesting? I mean, it's
yeah.
just cruel beyond belief. But that's just one thing that just really caught my eye. Um,
Oh, man.
yeah, so that seems to have died down for the time being. But we do have the Democratic Convention coming up, and that's a lot of people are looking at that as a
Well,
possible
when's
focus.
that? It's going to be in Chicago. People are
Yeah,
talking about Vietnam War
yeah. There was a
parallels.
famous. It was the Democratic Convention of 1968. Just led to mayhem in the streets, and people were wondering whether or not there's going to be a replay of that. We'll see.
Right. Well, I saw. I'm sure you saw this too. that Netanyahu said that they will fight with their fingernails if needed if U.S. stops sending aid for their offensive
Yeah.
in Rafah.
Right.
So it's a clear signal that we don't care. We're doing this. We're going to
Yeah.
invade
Well,
Rafah.
I think he knows he's going to get the aid. I mean, there has been some. I think your analysis the last time was completely correct. I mean, there was this announcement from the Biden administration that they had suspended this aid package and they couldn't support what Israel is doing. But as other people pointed out, actually, like they surged a lot of weapons into Israel before then. Israel has more than enough weapons, and plus they recently passed this package, $26 billion for
Right.
Israel. And yeah, their Israel is not going to be anywhere short on arms. I think it's just part of the same old show. Again, if it was real, I think what you said was true. If it was real, like if Biden really said, "Okay, enough, Netanyahu, you're not getting anything more," he would be screaming, bloody murder, and you would know that, like, representatives from APAC and whatever, they would all be on,
Right.
on Fox News or CNN and
Yeah.
screaming bloody murder, and then he would.
Yeah, we saw what Netanyahu and the
But Netanyahu seems to be pretty calm because I think they have a deal. They say, "Okay, you do this, I'll do that, and whatever," and you go in and rough.
Right. That's I agree because we've seen what they did with when students started protesting, how they went crazy and demanded this crackdown, and when Biden says we're going to stop sending you weapons, no, not a peep really. Like that's okay, and then just this statement now. A couple days after, so I think like you said, we've given them enough weapons. We're giving them 26 billion. It seems like this statement to say that we're not going to fund offensive weapons for a Rafah invasion is just to add lip service, and they've already sent them to them to carry this out. The Rafah invasion, I just feel like it's been this kind of slow trickle. Maybe that's their policy. It seems like they sent in some tanks. They started bombing some buildings.
Right.
Horrible stuff, but it's kind of people feel like almost are getting desensitized to it in a way because they've just been doing it so long that we're just kind of like, oh yeah, and
right. I mean, horrible things are happening. It may not. It seems like there's kind of slowly but steadily just intensifying. The attacks on Rafah right now. We'll see how far it goes.
When is the Democratic convention?
So I believe it's the end of June. That's my guess. Something like that. Yeah.
If Netanyahu says he wants to keep supports Biden, prefers the conservatives, how much influence would he have into say like making this a bad go for Biden? Is that part of his calculations? Like
it could be.
Like let's get, or he just doesn't care.
I think he just doesn't care. Right. I mean, he knows it. He just he believes, and unfortunately, almost certainly correctly, that he'll get away with bloody murder, whatever he does. He's got enough support on both sides of the aisle that,
Okay, so has there really been any new developments in the Middle East, or are we just sitting in this? It was so intense for a little while that I was like, I couldn't. Now I feel like we've kind of, like you said, it's still a hot situation. There are still people being massacred every day, but.
Well, I'll just give you an example. I just went and took a look at the UNRWA, UNRWA, website and their most recent situation report and statement by their Governor General. And I was struck, actually, by how some of the things he said. For example, the Governor General was just recently denied entry into Gaza again. And I don't think that was commented on anyway. And then he also pointed out that, there's been in the last week several incidents of harassment of UNRWA personnel. And he mentioned, like UNRWA personnel being, convoy shot at, the people arrested, the employees, UNRWA employees being stripped naked and beaten. These, again, I didn't see it. Probably was reported somewhere, but it's just sort of taken for granted. Yeah, that's what they do all the time, right? And then in the situation report, it started listing like the casualties among, the UNRWA, these UN employees. They call them, the colleagues. There have been 188 have been killed so far. And he said and pointed out this is an increase of 6 from the last report. The last report was just a week earlier. So
They're still
yeah, they're
killing
just
them.
being killed. Right. I mean, and this is again, this should be huge news, but it's just like, yeah, again, it's the new normal. It's just people, like you say, maybe we're getting used to it.
Right.
And then you asked me last time about the starvation,
Mm.
and yeah, they are. He said in the month of April there was actually more trucks were let through than any other month since October,
Mm.
but it was like 200 or how many tons. It was only half of what was needed. So they said. So there is food getting through, but they were getting through two crossings. One of them was Kerem Shalom, and the other is Rafah. Now Rafah has been shut down, so that's obviously going to be reduced. And again, it was half of what's needed. So if they're maybe we're not quite have famine. They're not, people aren't just dying in the streets right now in great numbers, but there's obviously a danger of it. And and again, I just saw too. It's just like there is some trucks are getting through, again, half of what is needed, but then there are efforts even by Israeli citizens to stop the convoys of trucks.
I've seen
Yeah,
those.
right.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and it's, again, that I didn't see that getting any play in the press, and I'm sure it was reported somewhere, but I just it was there on Twitter, and it was more sort of the dissident alternative media, but it was there. It's happening.
Mm.
So these horrible things are going on, but we're just not hearing much about it.
Right. And it seems to be quieter. I mean, obviously, Iran and Hezbollah also seem to be quieted down a little bit. Very intense a couple weeks ago. So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. And unfortunately for those Gazans, more of them are going to have to die, I think, before there's going to be a reaction. So, and I think there's going to have to be a lot, like the way that they're carrying things on now, they might get away with it for a while. We talked about this before, kind of the policy should be to not kill, for Israel, is not to kill them all too quickly, because then it creates too much of a reaction, but to just slowly kill them over time and to push them out.
Right.
So let's see if they're able to do that,
right, and get away with it.
Get away with it.
Yeah, and
because that's kind of what they're doing right now.
Right. Well, I say, okay, they're getting, according to UNRWA, they're getting half of the the basic food supplies that they need. And we're talking about flour and powdered milk, that kind of thing. But also, he said it like, I guess approximately 30% of the hospitals or medical institutions are still functioning in some form or another. But I think greatly reduced capacity because again, they're not getting supplies. Whether it's medicine or gauze or whatever whatever you need to keep a hospital running. And then so many of these hospitals that are still functioning are also damaged, and personnel have been killed and whatever. So there are 30% that are functioning in some capacity. The total capacity has got to be way below that. So this is just how can we not have, a huge number of excess deaths?
Right.
I mean, because again, if you're only having like 10% of the amount, of medical needs being met, during only half the food that you should be having.
During time of starvation, malnourishment, and also bombings. It's just, it's got to be horrific conditions right now. Okay, well, moving away from the Middle East just temporarily, we can just maybe not dive too far into this, but I just saw on the news that a Kharkov offensive was beginning. At least Zelensky made that statement. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, no, it appears to be that, some kind of offensive is underway. I don't think there's any doubt about it, because there are a lot of reports from both the Ukrainian and the Russian sides. And first, I think there was some really intense artillery barrages and drone strikes, and a huge number of drones just in the sky. And all these things have been reported by Kharkov residents. And apparently, the Russians have already captured a fair amount of territory, tens of square kilometers. So they're moving forward. It's more than just a probing action. Now, it's not clear exactly. From what I understand, it's not possible in any way with the forces that they've committed. It wouldn't be possible for them to take the city of Kharkov. but they could have a more limited offensive. Perhaps what they're aiming to do is just establish a cordon sanitaire, a buffer zone. That's something that actually, I think even Putin himself said that's something we need to do because of the shelling of the various towns in
Belgorod.
Belgorod, right? So they're going to probably at least push them back a certain distance from the border. But we've also mentioned that this could have a dual use. Okay, yeah, they established this buffer zone, but at the same time, they just tie up a lot more, a great number of Ukrainian soldiers and units that now cannot be redeployed to other parts of the front.
So when you say this buffer zone, are they just creating this from the north, close
Yeah.
to the Russian border, or are they going to try to encircle the city?
Okay.
What's
Well,
the?
yeah. Well,
We don't
there's
know.
we really don't know. I mean, at this point, it seems to be just be coming from the north, from Belgorod. But there have been reports, over the last couple of months that there is a buildup of forces close to Kupiansk, which is kind of the northeast. And the Russian forces, moved right up against Kupiansk, which is an important city in the eastern part of Kharkov. So some people are saying that it may be some sort of pincher movement where they might start striking from the east there while they're coming down from the north. But we'll see.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Well, I think we'll have a lot to talk about on
yeah,
Monday. See how this Kharkov offensive is carried out. We speculated before. How does it work when you take a city of I think 1.5
yeah.
million people,
Well, again, I think from
and
what
then
I've heard is that at least with the forces they committed so far, there's just no possibility that they're trying to take the city, but maybe just a certain amount of the territory of the
just
oblast.
to start it, to surround
Yeah,
it, to
but
begin.
yeah, but that may be farther down the road there. I mean, remember it was revealed that an air base had been built very close to there. I think this may be just the beginning, like the first stage of a major operation that
Oh,
may end with the taking of the city.
okay, interesting. Well, we got a lot of things coming up then. Well, I mean, we do every week, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can stop here unless there's anything else you want to add. Anything?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. All
All
right.
right.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Dad.